Well, since she quit the Greens in February and turned independent, Senator Lidia Thorpe has been making the case for the Black Sovereign movement, which opposes the Voice in favour of treaty, truth-telling and reparations. Senator Thorpe has made headlines all year, including just last week, where she advocated a no vote at the National Press Club, while simultaneously arguing a no victory would prove Australia is a racist country. For her frank and fearless contribution to the Voice debate, I spoke to Lidia Thorpe a little earlier and began by asking her to outline her argument against the referendum.
Well, it has no power, for one. It may or may not be able to provide advice to the Parliament. So it's not going to get down into the weeds and create a more just society for our people. And that starts with the recommendations into deaths in custody, also the Bringing Them Home report, which have been sitting on the shelf there for, 30 years already. Do they need advisors to come and tell them to do the job and implement the recommendations that not only will save Aboriginal people's lives, but will also save everyone else's lives, just to fix this broken system, or in other words, a system that was created to be broken so that we are denied our justice.
Could the Voice not help pressure a government to deliver on some of those issues? I mean, if there was a voice that was saying to the government, well, you need to implement the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, you need to implement the recommendations from the Bringing Home report, wouldn't that put more pressure on the government to do those sort of things?
Well, not necessarily, not when it has no power. I mean, we've had marches, we've shut down cities right across this country to bring the attention of deaths in custody and child removal for decades and decades. I just can't see how a powerless voice is going to get too much traction. And if you look at the minister already, she's talking about housing and other areas that aren't directly related to these recommendations. So they're doing everything that they can to avoid implementation, and they're fluffing around the edges, basically coming up with a powerless voice that will be elected by the people. What does that actually look like when a government is so reliant on dodgy corporations and dodgy organisations who always get to have a say over our lives as well? It's very convenient that these, successive governments have maintained power and control of our corporations and organisations, for them to be our voice and decide for us which part of the country gets destroyed on a regular basis.
Do you think the fact the Yes campaign has won the support of so many of those big corporations? We saw Qantas sign up last week. We've seen others, including Wesfarmers and big banks. Do you think having those major corporations supporting Yes, do you think it's helping or hurting their campaign?
I think, from a black perspective, it's certainly hurting when you look at these same corporations and mining companies who are doing a lot of harm to our country and our people through native title, and you see the disputes around the country on native title. Native title is about protecting lands for all of our futures. It's not about, stealing your backyard, which you might hear on this channel, but it's about protecting sacred sites and waterways and having clean air for all of us to be able to survive on this planet.
What about the Uluru Statement from the Heart itself? Because one of the things that you've spoken about, and one of the 5 things that you listed last week at the Press Club, was treaty, another was truth-telling. The Uluru Statement from the Heart not only talks about a voice, but it talks about Makarrata and it talks about treaty. Could the Voice not be, as people like Yingi Agiula here in the Northern Territory have articulated, the first step on the road to achieving those other things that you say you want, being truth-telling and being treaty?
Well, look, this is about going into the colonial constitution, and I know that some people don't like me saying those words, but effectively a constitution was developed here 1901. Now, you know, we've been here since the beginning of time. So to have England come over here and put their flag in the ground and create this new law called the Australian Constitution, we have our own constitution here. We have the oldest constitution on the planet, which includes looking after each other, which includes the land and the water and the totems for all of us to benefit and share and protect and nurture. Now, going into the Australian Constitution as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, First Peoples, we have to come to some agreement about sovereignty in this country. Like, you know, we have to come to some kind of an agreement first before we decide to go into your constitution, because we've never agreed to that constitution. So we've got to go forward, you've got to go back. And that's what I think we need to do to be able to mature as a nation. We can have a treaty of the 21st century. It's what we make it, the people in this country. And we can make it through peace and respect and learn from one another and have local agreements that feed up to a federal framework. And we can call on the King to have that conversation with us, join us for that conversation. Shouldn't we have someone from this country presiding over this country instead of the King of England?
With the treaty process, we're seeing these treaties being developed. You know, we see Queensland, the Northern Territory, Victoria committing to treaty processes. But, I mean, just to go to your point about the King, can the states actually negotiate treaties with different Aboriginal clans, or is this something that needs to be negotiated with the Commonwealth or even with the Crown?
Well, a treaty is between two sovereigns. So the Crown says that they are sovereign through enacting the Australian Parliament, and we are sovereign. We've been sovereign since the beginning of time, and we've proven that with the ancient cultural sites around the country and our ancient stories of how this country came to be. We have proof that we've been here for since a time immemorial. So sovereign to sovereign is not states and territories. And those state and territory treaties, whilst it's a good idea and it's mainly Labor that are doing it, it's run by the government. It's dictated to by the government. I was involved in the treaty process in Victoria as the member for Northcote. I negotiated the treaty legislation in Victoria, and it's not good. They would not acknowledge that we are the sovereign people of these lands. They would not allow for an Elders Council to be established and part of the legislation. The whole chamber voted that down. So there are problems with that. We have 38 nations in Victoria, and only 11 are around the table to negotiate treaty in Victoria. So you can't exclude people. You've got to bring everybody to the table and negotiate in good faith and respectfully.
You also, just finally, you made the point last week that we wouldn't have enough money to pay the reparations that are owed. How would these treaties be negotiated if we don't have the money to pay the reparations? And what sort of reparations do you think would be sought?
I thought I'd throw that one out there just as a bit of a hook, line and sinker, and that is because it would make the country go broke, and we don't want the country to go broke. Like, we're not silly, but we have a right to negotiate so that we can benefit from this country like we used to. We used to have access to land. We used to have access to water. We used to have access to our language and our law, and our children weren't being taken away, and our people weren't being put in prison like they are today. So we just want peace, And I think in terms of what is owed, we negotiate at the local level through family clan groups, and the country will not go broke if it's done properly and respectfully. So, yeah, we just want we want to get back to what we used to be like and have access to what we used to have, because it does affect our health and well-being. Our DNA relies upon the land, the water, our totems. Without that, we're nothing. So we have to negotiate what that looks like.
You said that you might be for changing your mind if the Prime Minister could commit to implementing some of those recommendations, or all of those recommendations from the Royal Commission and from bringing them home. Doesn't look like he's going to commit to that. So I presume you're not for turning at this point, probably a couple of months out from the referendum?
I've been negotiating since I got there to have those recommendations implemented. I mean, one of the recommendations is to raise the age of legal responsibility, but it's also about healthcare in prisons. Every prisoner in the prisons does not have access to healthcare and certain medications. So it's for all people. And yeah, they don't want to get their hands dirty. They don't want to commit to anything relating to those recommendations. And so I'll continue to say no to the referendum. I don't think that we should have a referendum. I think that no and yes are both racist notions. The whole process of the referendum is based on racism, and that is the problem. And we need to start again, and it has to start with truth.